I'm resident of Collinwood for YouTube, Joel Sange, joined by my buddy Patrick McCray and my buddy Gordon Dymowski. We're here to talk about Dark Shadows episode 50, narrated by Alexander Moltke, uh, written by Art Wallace, and directed by John Sedgwick. I really, really love how we have actual shots of Seaview Terrace here. We get Victoria winners coming out of Seaview. So they're having a little fun and showing they have an on location shot here, which I love. Um, they do that in the beginning, which is really cool. I love how we get the walk from there to Widow's Hill, and Carolyn's already on top of Widow's Hill. And this episode, Bill Malloy is still missing. This is obviously going to lead to a big event, obviously, for Dark Shadows, which is ultimately the death of Bill Malloy. But I like how they do this episode because it's been building. It's been building. You have this conversation between Carolyn and Victoria on top of Widow's Hill about Carolyn's talking about Joe. She's also talking about the widows. And you also have a conversation later on about how where they're in the when they go into the drawing room with later on with her mom, with Carolyn's mother Elizabeth, about how there was supposed to be a third was widow that jumps from Widow's Hill. So, and the reason Elizabeth doesn't really want to be part of that conversation, Carolyn's trying to cheer her up, is because obviously Bill Malloy's been missing, and Elizabeth has been worried this whole entire time. So has Carolyn, but she's sort of trying to find ways to cheer her mom up, trying to pacify other people. And Victoria is sort of her shoulder to not necessarily crying, but to talk to, which I really like. I also love David Hennessy in this episode, how where he's talking about Ghost, and later on when you see the word death written on Victoria's mirror, and Victoria confronts him over it. She says, "You take that off, or I'll go get your aunt." And he wipes it off. And later on, you get this scene where Victoria and Carolyn go back out to look for Carolyn's watch, which is not on her. She says the strap broke. It's a watch that Joe Haskell gave her. They mention it. They mentioned this early in the episode. So this is sort of your way the writers are going to get you back on top of Widow's Hill, which is nice. Art Wallace did a really good job with that. And he has this moment. There's this really good moment of they show you the shot of the staircase, and before the scream, and I'll get into the Roger stuff too, but before the scream, you have this moment of Elizabeth and David are having this conversation on top of the staircase landing. That David says, "Where'd they go?" And Elizabeth says they're going back out to Widow's Hill to look for Carolyn's watch. And he goes, "All they'll find is death." And you hear the scream, which is Victoria Winters. To me, Alexandra was one of the best television scream queens. I love the way she screamed. When I got into horror, scream queens were everything. And Victoria's right up, or Alexandra is right up there for me. What did you guys think of this episode? Go ahead. Sorry.
Gordon, what are your thoughts?
Well, I loved how this episode uses the wristwatch as a way to kind of start feeding the seeds for the big episode for the big reveal in episode 100 where they're trying to look for a pen. I I like I like yeah. Okay, well,
Continue.
I did like the scenes with Seaview Terrace. That kind of because it's something that I think the later episodes really don't have a lot of, is that sense of geography of Collinwood as a place. Um, especially like in the I'd say post 1897, like you've got the store, but everything is so studio bound. You don't have a sense of any geography. Um, in terms of plot, I thought it was pretty much. It's one of those stories that's leading up to the body, the body and the cliffs, because I'm assuming this is the kickoff to the Bill Malloy is dead, who murdered him
Well, yeah, because we
subplot,
see the body at the end.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that I can understand, and I don't mean this in a particularly nasty way, but I can understand why some network executives might have wanted to cancel the show very early on, because it's a very deliberate, kind of almost standard kind of pacing.
I was waiting for the word deliberate to unfurl itself. It's a frequent euphemism.
Yeah, it's very much a standard view, a standard plotting. Especially with the, it's like you've got David saying, "Oh, well, there are ghosts here. Oh no, there are no ghosts here." I mean, it's not bad, but it's kind of what you would expect in a '60s soap opera. I think, and the one thing that really bothered me, and it's maybe just me being nitpicky, is that with Victoria's Scream, it's almost like they edited it a little too soon. Like it feels like there's a piece missing where Victoria and Carolyn are walking up to the cliff. They're talking. Victoria looks down and screams. It feels like that there's a piece there that was cut out. Maybe it was just me, but it's that would have, I think, helped. Otherwise, it just feels like it cuts from Collinwood to Victoria screaming the body.
I sort of wonder if they were supposed to show them walking back there.
Mm-hmm.
Supposed to show them walking back there. What do you mean?
Like, okay, like early on in this episode, we see Victoria, like I mentioned, we see Victoria Winters coming out of Seaview. I sort of wonder if there was supposed to be a shot. Now, they might have not necessarily showed Seaview, but they could have showed a shot of the doors and them walking out the doors and then walking back to Widow's Hill. They could have showed that shot, like, throughout, had some, again, maybe they just didn't have the budget quite at this time. I don't know. But that
they only had so much stock footage.
Right, I get that. But I'm just, that's something that they could have maybe played with. They don't show that. They don't show them going, like, the actual walk back to Widow's Hill because they're looking for Carolyn's watch. They just cut back to there, and you hear Victoria Winters scream.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of nitpicky, but it's just the one detail that really bothered me.
Well, that's, I can understand that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Patrick, what did you think?
I thought it was fine. Let's give it its proper props for atmosphere, having a lot of atmosphere. And I think, it does one of the things that Dark Shadows in this era does extremely well, which is it has characters speak poetically about life-changing observations and decisions that all end up being completely unmemorable and absolutely go nowhere, which is what a soap opera is supposed to do. It's supposed to be a thing where when you're watching, it's like real life. When you're watching it at the time, it seems like, wow, this is all very vital stuff. These are character-defining moments and so on and so forth. And then both you and the characters have seemingly forgotten about them, 5 minutes later. Because if the characters remembered them, the show would be over, like completely over. So, they have to sort of stretch it out. I think the stuff with, death showing up in the mirror, that's good stuff. That was the nice, dimension of creep that the show had. in that era. And I haven't seen other soap operas of the era, so I can't definitively compare them, but I suspect, they weren't going there. So, I mean, I like that about it. At the same time, is this a show anyone would be watching or talking about if it were not for what it later became? And I think the answer is no. And I think it doesn't make it bad. It just makes it an average example. I'm about to say this having previously said I've never seen another episode of another soap opera from this era, so I completely disqualified what I'm about to say, which is my kind of scholarship. But I think you're probably getting a very, very, very average soap opera from the era. It doesn't pretend to be anything else. And so the tough question, and I think it's an honest question, and ultimately probably a pointless question, is this. If we just encountered this from out of nowhere, and if we did not know where everything was going, we'd never heard of Barnabas Collins, this was just a thing on TV that we then knew would be on every day, with everything else bidding for our time, honestly, you know where I'm going with this, would we continue to watch it 3 or 4 episodes in, with everything else bidding for our time? And I would say, on average, no. And because even for sort of creepy, gothic type stuff, there's other material out there. And this early part of the show almost feels like, since its release, has become kind of a geek bragging right. It's the sort of thing that separates the dilettantes from the hardcore Marines. And while I think it's important to look at, I'm firmer than ever in my contention that although this has a lot of similarities to Dark Shadows, it's ultimately not Dark Shadows. It's Shadows on the Wall. And it's an interesting show that Art Wallace created. I'm not sure it's Assignment Earth quality, but it's interesting. And that is my take on this.
To answer your question, would I be watching it every day? Well, I was watching this every day in syndication.
Yeah, Jewel, you're leaving out the qualifying element. Gordon, what was the qualifying element I threw in?
That if we approach this episode on its own, we didn't have any context, we had no idea of what Dark Shadows was or is. If if this were our first ever episode of Dark Shadows, what would we still be watching?
Maybe 3 or 4 episodes after this. Let's say we give it 3 or 4 more episodes.
Right. Yeah, and I think too, it's this period of Dark Shadows. For me, it's basically it's year 1, and the first year of every series is a shakedown cruise. The first year you're figuring out what works and what doesn't. You can tell that about this time the producers are thinking, okay, we're talking about ghosts. Maybe we should start thinking about, is this going to branch off into, yes, ghosts exist and there's supernatural stuff going on, or is it going to branch off into, okay, there's a perfectly rational explanation?
I mean, they're upping the challenge rating. They definitely are. I mean, they're going in the right direction with this. Death on the Mirror and everything else, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, it's not bad. It's just kind of like, it's more of a, if you were to take, like when we watched episode 100, that was taken out of sequence. We're all lucky enough to have all of Dark Shadows and to be able to watch, so we can get the context easily. This, I think, is one where you could easily see it's about to branch off, and the fact that after this episode, the show started leaning more into ghosts and supernatural. The fact that that also started to really think about, okay, what can we do with our budget, with the technology we have, to go full on supernatural? I mean, that's a later decision, but I think this isn't. Um, not every episode of Dark Shadows is an automatic classic. Not every episode of Dark Shadows is brilliant, and but there's no real bad episodes of Dark Shadows. Like there's no list of the top 10 Dark Shadows episodes you should avoid at all costs because they're horrible. I mean, the worst Dark Shadows episode is just okay. And this is an okay episode, but I think you could see where they're starting to they're starting to think, okay, maybe we can go in a direction that we didn't think of before.
I think the thing with the mention of ghosts, it's always been there for me for Dark Shadows. I mean, they do. A great example is in the first episode where Victoria Winters says about you make it sound like there's chains rattling on the wall. She says to Maggie, and do you think that's wrong? And when I heard the words chains rattling on the wall, by that time I had watched the original Christmas Carol in black and white. So when I hear chains rattle, I'm like, oh, so there may be ghosts in this house.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you look at this episode, it's just you hear the words ghost a lot. You hear even Carolyn's talk is a bit morbid, which I like. Again, Elizabeth is.
Oh, the dialogue's fantastic. I mean, the dialogue is really strong in this.
Yeah, and I like what Jen Bennett does here, because though she doesn't have a ton of lines in this episode, she does so much with her facial features. It's really amazing that you can see the panic, the worry, and the way they're shooting her. I love it. It's really smart by her. Like, I love when a character doesn't have to so much say something. You can tell by the look on their face. It's like, okay, they're worried, and there's a reason they probably should be worried. And then when you get the confrontation with Roger, you get it, because she was told by Victoria Winters, hey, Bill Malloy was here, and him and Roger had this exchange. And she asked Roger what it was about. And Roger's eating like a sandwich and he's drinking some milk. He just passed it off that they were arguing about the numbers, the business numbers, the figures, and that they were going to meet in his office. He doesn't make mention of Bert Devlin or Sam Evans. And you also hear from Roger that he drove to Bill Malloy's sister's house or something, and that's where he's been all day. So you have an excuse why Roger hasn't been there for the biggest part of the episode. It's just like, or where he's been since the last episode. And it's just like, okay, maybe. Like, I can't call you a liar on it, but that's an interesting little story you've come up with there. It's
also neat that Roger Collins talks about how enjoyable it is to have a cold chicken sandwich and a glass of milk.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's a real glass, so he can't crush it like he could frosted glass.
Oh, the smell would be horrible. Mrs. Johnson hadn't been hired yet. So it's up to Matthew Morgan to do everything around the house. I want you to think about what that house must have really been like. It's just a good thing that they had 40 rooms to spread the mess over, over several decades. So no one really noticed. I mean, they had to eat Matthew Morgan's cooking, for God's sake.
I think at times Elizabeth does some of the cooking. We just don't see it.
Maybe. I just can't believe Elizabeth would cook. I don't know. Now, when he says he was at Bill Malloy's sister's house, is that just, is it a house that has sort of an empty dress in it that just would have happened to have fit Bill Malloy? Was there really a sister, or was it just Bill? And does Roger know this? Has he had a torrid affair with Bill Malloy's sister, like something out of David Henry Wang's M. Butterfly for years, not realizing it was Bill Malloy.
Yeah. I think too.
These are legitimate questions.
I think too with this episode, I'll answer your question in a second, but I think too with this episode, you're getting very much Hitchcock style build up, where they're building up toward discovering a body. They're building up towards something, and which I like. Again, horror, in a sense, is all about pacing. When you watch Psycho, when you watch Vertigo, when you watch John Carpenter's Halloween, horror in every way is all about the pace of it and the build up to the tension, and then the release of said tension, because that's one of the most horrific moments is the release of it too. It's like, oh my God, you weren't expecting that. And then when you see Bill Malloy's, when they go back to Widow's Hill, even though they just jump back to it, you don't see the walk back to it. When you hear Victoria Winter screaming, the effect is there, and it's like, oh shit, there's a body.
How long has Bill's body been missing?
Couple days.
Okay.
Give or take.
Okay.
Oh, and to answer your question, I think Bill Malloy does have a sister, or whatever Roger says. And yeah. So.
Okay.
Well,
I would like her to be played by the same actor who plays Bill Malloy.
Well, there's a third option. Bill Malloy's sister could be what the Mormons call a sister wife.
That's true, but then Joe Haskell's going to get jealous. I'm just saying I have theories.
You know who they should have got to play Bill Malloy's sister?
Sterling Hayden.
They needed to do the twin thing again, and had Khalees Blackburn play her.
Sure. He only hires women as his housekeeper who look exactly like his sister.
Yeah,
it's a particular diabolical kink.
Why not?
I think it's a great idea. Now, is Bill Malloy the father of one Harry Johnson? Seriously.
Oh my God.
I think she talks about Harry's father at some point. Doesn't she? They're like a no good, good for nothing, lying down at the bottom of Widow's Hill. She probably just is accusing Bill of lying down on Widow's Hill to get out of his husbandly duties.
I still want that DNA test that proves that Harry Johnson is Mrs. Johnson's son. Okay.
Well, wait. I mean, I've never heard of many mistaken like maternity suits. So who is really his mother?
I'm telling you, Mrs. Johnson. Okay, Mrs. Johnson says in an episode of Dark Shadows, "You wouldn't get 2 words out of me about my family." It's like, okay, to Jason McGuire of all people, and it's like, I mean, look, it's not like Jason is the most stand-up guy. So I mean, even if you tell Jason McGuire about your family, think of the scum you're telling the story to. So it's not like he doesn't have dirt on himself. So it's not true. Like, and when Harry shows up, let's be honest. I don't look at Clarice Blackburn and go, yeah, that's his mother. I look at Clarice Blackburn and go, okay, you have a son who just, I don't know, showed up out of nowhere. Yeah, I'm not really buying that that's your son.
Yeah.
I believe that this is Mrs. Johnson, secret agent Mrs. Johnson, and Harry Johnson's been sent to Collinsport because he's being punished. They need someone to whip him into shape, and who better than Mrs. Johnson? She's got to come up with cover story. So she tells Lewis, "Oh, and by the way, my son needs someplace to stay."
What I think Mrs. Blackburn just grabbed a kid off the street and named him Harry Johnson because she thought it would be easier to take care, a child would be easier to take care of than a puppy.
Now, what are you telling me that 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 Sarah Johnson comes home to Collinwood? She looked Roger straight in the eye and says, "I need someplace to stick Harry Johnson," and he says, "Right here." Are you trying to convince me that's the dialogue that happened? I don't believe it. Doesn't sound like the Roger Collins I know.
Yeah, Jewel, Pixar doesn't.
I can't.
Yeah, we need proof. We need solid evidence.
We need something. We need a Harry Johnson that'll stand up in court.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. Hypothetically, you don't have to give me literally.
Okay.
Hypothetically, where the hell has Harry Johnson been all this time?
Right under our noses.
Yeah, I think Willie just got sick and tired of his guff, knocked him out, and bricked him up with Reverend Trask.
Oh yeah, you mean like where does Harry Johnson go?
And no, not where does Harry Johnson get? Let me specify. When I say where Harry Johnson's been, okay. When Clarice Blackburn's Mrs. Johnson is like, "You ain't get 2 words out of me about my family," so she doesn't want to talk about her family. It lets you know there might be some stuff going on there. Okay,
Yeah.
And I get that might set up for Harry Johnson later on, like, oh, here, this is why she didn't want to talk about her family. But I don't look when I see Harry Johnson, I see no personality traits at all of Mrs. Johnson, which leads me to believe that Mrs. Johnson is full of shit. That's not her son.
I can't believe you'd say that about Mrs. Johnson.
So Joe, you'll agree with my theory that basically Harry Johnson is a substitute for a puppy.
He's a substitute for something. I mean, he could be. He could.
So happiness is a warm Johnson. Is that what you're saying?
It is okay. Before I became a parent, before I had 2 kids, all right.
Oh boy, here we go.
Oh boy.
This is what we've been waiting for. All right, Jewel, out with it.
Long before me and the missus had 2 kids, you know what we had first? Know what we had first?
Probably peace and quiet.
A Tamagotchi.
We had this beautiful. We had this thing called a dog named Chili. Okay, most people before becoming parents have pets.
I mean, they all have pets after they become parents. I mean, did you have to sacrifice the dog to bring the child into existence? What do you mean? What do you saying?
Actually, there's a little bit of a story there. The day my daughter was born,
oh no,
the dog died.
Oh God, I was afraid you were going to say that.
True story.
Wow, but it's not like related to.
No, look, I think when you look at Harry Johnson, okay, let's.
You rescued the point. Yes, when you stare Harry Johnson right in the eye.
When you look at Mrs. Johnson's son, and I use that term loosely, here's the guy who literally, the only hint you get at his past is he's been in some sort of trouble, and it's like, okay, that's sort of vague. I mean, has he been in prison? Maybe. It's like, can we get a little more background on Harry Johnson other than he's been in trouble? I could walk in that house, get a job, and say, hey, my brother's coming to live here next week. He's been in some sort of trouble. That says absolutely nothing. Harry Johnson is either the best, the son that nobody wants to say anything about, okay, or he's one of the most messed up spies ever, who literally goofed up and has to get retrained by Mrs. Johnson, only to not only be used by Mrs. Johnson, to be used by Barnabas, to be used by Nicholas. I mean, for God's sakes.
It's being used a lot.
Do we think Harry Johnson is a Leviathan?
I don't know.
Is Harry Johnson a snake guy?
Well, I think using Harry Johnson and God is probably not the smartest thing.
It's the only theological background I have.
What's you guys' favorite scene from this episode 50?
Oh, that's.
I'd
have.
Gordon, you go. I can't see anything.
I think Roger with the chicken sandwich and the milk, because it's just such a non-Roger scene.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
There were a lot of chicken sandwiches being eaten on television. Kirk has one in The Trouble with Tribbles. Remember the Tribbles in the middle of the
Yep.
A lot of chicken sandwiches being eaten. Followed up with that. What is the chicken code we don't know about?
What's your favorite scene in this episode, Patrick?
You know, I gotta say, it's a dark horse in all of this, but I really enjoy the dialogue. Just very well realistic dialogue between Carolyn and Victoria, up on the cliff at the beginning of the episode. I just think it's a lovely series, well acted. I can't remember a thing about it, but I remember when I was watching it, really appreciating it. So, yeah, that.
I'm a sucker for the end of this episode. The scream by Alexandra is just awesome. Great scream.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. I forget about that, but I mean, she's no Walter Taylor.
What did you guys think of how they shot the body at the bottom of Widow's Hill?
I was glad I was spared the gore of what it would have looked like, because that's what I was thinking about when I saw it, and it would be just horrific.
Yeah, I thought it was effective that, one, they didn't do the, hey, look, there's a body down at the rocks without showing it, and that the body is actually kind of moving back and forth with the current.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's been said, there's no way that will be there. That's the only thing we're going to wash out to sea.
Yeah, I think the effect in this episode with the water and the body in the water is really well done. To go with the scream is really good.
Did Matthew Morgan take the body, keep it for whatever purpose, and then put it back out to be found? Can you prove it didn't happen? Future's where we're going to spend the rest of our lives through.
Repeat that question again. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Where?
Repeat the question.
Did Matthew Morgan, to explain where this body has been and why it hasn't been washed out to sea, did Matthew Morgan take the body, keep it, in the old house somewhere to freshen it up, in the old house, considering what it probably smelled like after the gypsies got done with it, and then put it back out on the rocks lovingly to be found?
I think when he explains that he more accidentally killed Bill Malloy than anything, but murder's murder. I mean, and him falling into the water, look, you've seen the current from an effect standpoint in Dark Shadows, and I love how the waves keep coming in. So the waves brought the body in, and hey, who patrols the grounds to push the body back in the ocean? Oh, our buddy Matthew Morgan, our killer, who, and I love, by the way, I love Dana Elker when Matthew Morgan says, I wasn't thinking, oh no, I think you were thinking real good. And I love Dana Elker's dialogue to Matthew Morgan. Not in this episode, but it's in an episode that's coming up.
Let me ask you a question. Have you ever been up in the St. Louis Arch?
No.
Well, Gordon, have you ever been up in the St. Louis Arch?
No, I haven't.
You're in a very tiny capsule. If you were in that capsule, and everyone faces the wall, like a round capsule, and you're on sort of this circular bench. It's really tight, really small. Barely can fit 2 or 3 people in it. If you had Dana Elkhart, Chuck Morgan, and Thayer David in there, and then you somehow got wedged in the middle of them, and the cable broke, plunged downward, you'd be safe. Would that be enough to cushion you? Don't wait for the no.
Would it be enough to? I would say no. No.
Maybe I'm a dreamer. Gordon, what do you think?
I would say yes.
It's a better answer. It's a much better answer. It's time for Bushmills and strawberry and cream peppers.
Mm-hmm.
What does it taste like? I don't know.
What did you guys think about Roger and Elizabeth's dialogue near the end of this episode?
I don't remember it.
Liz is questioning him about, why didn't he tell her about the conversation that Bill Malloy and Roger had. Like, why wasn't he up front with that? She's questioning her brother about this. And he's just like, well, it was just about, he goes, well, who told you we had this conversation? And eventually she just says, well, Victoria told me. And he says, well, it was just about business anyway. It was just an argument over business. And we were going to talk in my office. Again, so.
I think there are probably a lot of conversations Bill Malloy and Roger Collins had that they didn't share with people.
Yeah. I could see them, especially at the Gentleman's Club in Collinsport. I'm just going to leave that there.
Oh my god!
Once was that was One-Eyed Jack instead of One-Eyed Jacks. The whole Twin Peaks.
Is there anything you guys want to add about episode 50 before we go?
Just that I think it's kind of, we start to see the first movement towards Dark Shadows becoming what it will eventually become, because it's starting to really kind of go, okay, we have high drama, but you could see where, okay, we're doing the ghost thing. Now we can start to decide whether we want to lead into the supernatural or we just want to be a boring, dull soap opera.
The answer, yes.
Mm-hmm.
It just depends on when.
I really think they did a great job here building off of things that they've been building upon. From the very beginning, they've been building upon this legend that this house may or may not be haunted. We've been getting subtle hints in certain episodes that, there's ghosts. Elizabeth falls asleep in a chair and says about there's no ghost here, and because she always gets the question. Then David says about ghost. And then in this episode, you get even a heftier conversation about the widows of Widow's Hill, about how there's supposed to be this third widow, the death written on the mirror, which is really cool. And the conversations about Joe isn't completely pointless. It's a very good, honest conversation between Victoria and between Carolyn, and I really enjoy the dialogue in each episode. The actors and actresses just do a bang-up job, and I love the effect we get in this episode. We get the scream, which was important to me because, again, I'm a horror guy at heart. So when I hear somebody scream, it's like, that's a great screamer.
I think of calling the police to them, but Joel, whatever goes in that area of Pennsylvania is your business. And he just laughed and laughed. Gordon, that's the last smile we will ever see.
Mm-hmm.
I need to quit laughing. It's hurting my rib.
All right.
Oh my God. What's that?
He's enjoying his mac and cheese.
Oh, okay. So anyway, really great episode. Really, it's a fun watch.
Actually, Joel, now that I'm thinking of it, I think you should do a spin-off, Cooking at Collinwood. You have like Patrick can make a dish, and then one day I'll make a dish. Yeah, I'll do cold chicken sandwiches and milk. It'll be, have other Dark Shadows eminence come on.
I want you to think about something. I've been driving for a long, long time. I ran an errand. I got into the house. But if you notice, I'm kind of moving in a specific kind of way. And I will bid you good night.
Okay. Good
Link to the Dark Shadows Day book about is going to be in the description box. Link to Gordon Dymowski's Amazon page is going to be in the description box. Well, wait, is there anything that shocks you about the prior episodes leading up to this one, Gordon?
No, I don't think we ever talked about the episodes prior to this one, and I think they're just kind of, again, it's at this point, Dark Shadows is trying to figure out what it is. So it's kind of like, I don't get, my view is that it's like Patrick will say it's not really Dark Shadows, it's shadows on the wall. I kind of think of it as, when you're starting something, you have some idea, but you want to see it, how it plays out. And I think the first 210 episodes are trying to figure out how we're going to do what we do. Because after this, you get the introduction of ghosts, then you get the Laura storyline, and then you get Barnabas Collins. So it's not the Dark Shadows we know. It's Dark Shadows trying to figure out what is Dark Shadows, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I really think they do a phenomenal job with the build up to all these episodes. The mentions of Ghost keep the ideal alive that the place could be haunted, which is really good. I think the actors, the paranoia of there being a ghost around is really set up throughout the actors. And look, when you look at a big gothic looking house, what's your first thought? Is that place haunted up there, or could it be haunted? Yeah, maybe. Oh my God. But yeah, for Patrick McCray, for Gordon Dymowski, I'm Joel Sades. You guys have a great night. Gordon, have a good night, buddy.
You too. Good night, all.
Bye.